Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Atlanta Photojournalism Seminar. My name is Alyssa Pointer, and I am a board member with the seminar. Today, we have a lot of great guests, and today we're going to be speaking with Khary Mason. We're really excited to have him, and I'm going to read his bio real quick, and then we'll get Khary to go ahead and start. So, Khary Mason is a native Detroiter who has spent more than half of his life working in law enforcement. In 2020, he decided that he wanted to become a bigger part of the change in the city that he had long hoped for. After retiring from the Detroit Police Department, Mason began a new career as a special agent for the State of Michigan Attorney General's Office in its newly formed Conviction Integrity Unit. Early in his career, he lost his younger brother to suicide. He would often remark that the brother he knew as a child was not the brother that returned after being incarcerated as a juvenile. The darker side of law enforcement seldom reveals itself to the world outside of the shadows created beneath the glow of streetlights. Surviving that world taught him to weaponize the combination of the captured image and the written word against the marginalized community that he served. In the past decade, Mason began to recognize that these age-old crime-fighting methods yielded very little positive impact for citizens living in impoverished areas. Understanding that images and words also possess liberating powers, Mason took a more proactive approach by expanding his grasp of visual literacy at the College for Creative Studies in the fall of 2015. There he began to write and perform spoken word, allowing his classmates to witness the trauma and dissonance he experienced in life existing outside of the margins of urban and suburban America. In 2016, Khary co-founded Capturing Belief, a children's photography and creative writing program based in Detroit. The concept was formed from the question, to what degree do images observed in life determine the belief in what is possible? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Khary Mason.
Thank you, Alyssa. I want to thank you guys for having me. We're first going to start out with a short documentary. In 2019, I was selected as a fellow for documenting Detroit. And I chose to study incarceration through the memories of my brother and through three very accomplished individuals who have spent a colossal amount of time behind bars. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you guys to I Am a Man. 2003, a suicide in Highland Park on Trumbull Street. Khary. He was my brother. My little brother was incarcerated as a juvenile in the W.J. Maxey Boys Training School with other children. Some were like him, others were rapists and murderers. When my brother came home, he wasn't the brother I knew, nor was he the son that my mother remembered. Yes, the rage was still there, but it was now quiet and only reserved for my mother, my sister, and I always wondered what abuses he endured in that place. Abuses that I never bothered to ask about. Abuses that he never brought himself to speak of. Before he was confined, he lived alone in the room that we used to share as children. He was alone with only his tormentors to keep him company while he was behind the wall. And when he returned home, he was alone again. We did not know how to help him, and he did not know how to ask.
I never wanted the help from someone who hadn't experienced it. So unfortunately, in order for someone who experienced it to be a part of the look of the therapy or what's needed for a person to recover from that trauma, they have to find a way to qualify. And unfortunately, not many people who've experienced it are going to qualify. So that means the numbers of the people who have been in our situation, the numbers of the people who have been in our situation are not going to show up in the process of recovery. Because the reason why we're sitting here is because no one expected for us to succeed. There was no rehabilitation was not a part of my incarceration, ever. On paper, someone sat around and said, okay, we're gonna come up with a reentry program. The reentry program teaches you how to fill out an application at Myers. That's exactly what they use. So there was never a vision for someone who created anything in the form of a program to include me succeeding. Succeeding to them was me getting a parole and getting a job at Myers. Half of the people who take that class can't fill out the application. How do I know? Because I was there. The person who's teaching the class won't say that. They're gonna joke behind closed doors over the fact that they have to teach someone how I've been able to grow is because no one was looking for me. Well, the reason why we're sitting here today is because at some point in time in our lives, we figured out that change was a part of us because we wanted it to be. So regardless of what we had adhered to or adopted in the past in the way of our thinking, at some point in time came personal growth, and then we have to separate yourself from a lot of people who try to get you to think the other way. So basically you become a leader instead of a follower.
We got to acknowledge the atrocities that have occurred, you know, within our communities, within our school system, within our families. We need truth and reconciliation, man. Yeah. We need that to the umpteenth power. We need to be honest, sincere, no pun intended, and candid about what really has happened, what is really happening. So when you talk about the trauma that one experienced in terms while he's in prison, let's talk about the trauma that he experienced before prison.
Yeah.
We was traumatized before we went to that. I can't, that's beyond a trauma center inside those prison walls. You know, being shot as teenagers, being shot at as teenagers, being, you know, running to school and running back from school, not knowing if you're gonna be jumped on, being robbed, in some cases, people being raped.
We first have to begin to talk to people who are coming up with the laws, making policies. The lawmakers are representatives who are supposed to represent our communities first and foremost, and let them know, like, I mean, mental health is real, point blank period, right? When you take a child out of their community and you say, okay, well, I'm gonna punish them for something they did wrong. Okay, we understand the prison system from that way, but there have to be other alternatives that what we can do just as a people, as a community, right? Like I said before, we're constantly being policed in this way. We don't understand the trauma, right? Because not only was your brother incarcerated, you were incarcerated during that time that he was incarcerated, your mom was incarcerated, your dad was incarcerated during the time he was incarcerated.
My sister, right?
Your sister, right? The whole family gets incarcerated. We have to understand what we're doing to not only just the individual, but what we're doing to families, and the families are the communities, first and foremost. So we have to put in resources that, let's just say, maybe your brother didn't even need to be incarcerated at that point in time.
There's a lot of stuff going on the inside that's not a part of the conversation. The real conversations have to be had. The real conversations aren't being had. The focus shouldn't be on how much you can spend on a prisoner store. That shouldn't be more important than your whatever it is you need for rehabilitation.
And on one level is a system of corruption as well. You know, you just saw on the news, you got men in there ODing from drugs and dying. You done seen that on Channel 7 News, plastered all over the news.
Right.
You don't think we know how to deal with that? You know, you don't think we know how to go in and navigate around that to be able to help people for real? You know, you can't put lipstick on a pig. You know, you can't put a Band-Aid on cancer, man. You know, so we have to peel back the layers, man, and deal with this thing this trauma, education, this suffering in silence, because if we are the answer and we are the change that they've been looking for, but they not calling on us enough.
I can't hear you.
Awesome. Sorry about that, Khary. I'm sorry about that. It was a beautiful video. I loved watching it. I watched it a little before we watched it today, and I love seeing the individuals with their family as you're talking about family. I love seeing the individuals with the community as you talk about community. How did you meet them? Do you mind me asking?
So I met them throughout my career. One of the individuals, Daryl Woods, I met a long time ago through my colleague Roman Blanquart, who helped us create Capturing Belief. But the rest of them I met in my travels in law enforcement.
And it sounds like you spoke with them in a group setting. Was that intentional? Why did you?
So I spoke with them individually in the very beginning, and then in the middle of the project, which took a year to shoot, COVID happened, and we didn't know if we were going to be able to finish the project. So the thought was to gather these three individuals together with Roman and I, and the thought was that I would interview them and have a conversation with regard to how the carceral state needed to change, and who better to help envision those changes than those who personally experienced those environments themselves.
Awesome. That was really great. I really did enjoy watching it. I love seeing the families in black and white. So I'm thankful for that. So can you tell us a little bit about Capturing Belief?
Sure. Roman Blanquart is a retired photojournalist from the Free Press, but we met when he was active. He's born in France, and he schooled and embarked upon his profession here in the United States. We met while I was on the job, and he was doing a story on murder and how it affects families on both sides. And we never lost touch. And so after a couple of years, we were seeking to create a project together that would help empower children through communication. And so we created Capturing Belief. It is basically based upon children being able to structure their own narrative, to be able to tell the world who they are instead of having someone from outside the culture tell the world who they are, because they often get it wrong, and getting it wrong is extremely dangerous for those cultures. We started in 2016. The first cohort was in Detroit, and in January of 2017, we taught its sister cohort in Nairobi, Kenya. At the end of those two cohorts, we placed the images into a volume, and that volume was shared on both continents with the student participants. We went on and we've done several cohorts, and we partnered with Say Play, which is one of Mitch Albom's nonprofits. And most recently, we've become a nonprofit, and Roman and I are both co-directors. We received a grant from Ford Motor Company about a year ago, and that enabled us to interact with students in communities in Southwest Detroit, Corktown, North Corktown, and Hubbard Richard. But we were also interacting with communities on the east side of Detroit. The first cohort went off without a hitch. The students did a historical expose on who made up all of these neighborhoods and the deep and rich history that was encompassed within them. But when the second cohort hit, we had our first class, and right after our first in-person class, COVID hit. And it forced us to think about the safety of the students. And so within about a week's time, we were able to go remote, and we created something called the Remote Ally Project, which enabled us to fulfill one of our early goals, to be able to cross-pollinate with students across the world. And so we had students from Kenya, Italy, France, Detroit, and Rochester Hills. There may be a couple that I am missing, but all of a sudden, all of these students got to see what each other's lives were about. And the project was basically a visual and audible diary of how COVID was impacting them personally. And that's Capturing Belief.
Awesome. And have you seen a lot of growth and potential through the kids throughout the program?
We've seen a massive amount of growth and extreme potential in many of our students. Some of our students have been with us since the very beginning of the program, and they've never left. They've always found us, and we've always had a soft place for them to land. We've always had a home for them. So yes, the answer is yes.
Awesome.
So I'm going to roll into this this last piece, and it is the reason that I'm here. I'm so thankful that you guys asked me to be here, because for so long I felt like a lot of people around me had very important things to say that could change the world, but nobody was listening. So this piece is called Planting Fear. Within the Fourth Amendment, it states, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. In translation, for Black people, this means that a search warrant allows the police to violate certain rights that all people are afforded, except for Black people, that is. Black people are more often than not deprived of their rights. So I ask you, what mischief must brew in the minds of officers in possession of such a document, whose purpose is to allow entry without consent into the home of a Black person? Do they enter with the intent to disrespect, shatter the peace, steal money, plant evidence, check boxes on scavenger lists looking for fried chicken boxes and malt liquor bottles? Or do they enter with a sporting purpose, a legal way to hunt down and take the lives of Black people perhaps, where the best imposters are rewarded for their terror cloaked in the robes of justice? He's going through something. And a guy like that has a lot of guns. They better be careful. This is what one of my supervisors said about me when I was experiencing one of the toughest times of my life. I never found out who they were, though. During that point in my career, I was a member of a multi-jurisdictional homicide unit, tasked with investigating some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. I'd recently had an awakening, realizing that law enforcement was being trained to use the phrase, "I feared for my life," as an excuse for the state-sponsored executions of Black people. Take any fatal force encounter where police took the life of a citizen somewhere in the real or manufactured circumstances. You will find embedded within the narrative this very phrase. And any lucky lottery winner from the jury pool who's been intravenously fed the rhetoric through television and movies that good cops sometimes have to do bad things to catch the bad guy or black guy, and just like that, you have an acquittal. The killers are now free to kill again. Possessing Black skin is like walking around with a lit stick of dynamite that was placed in your pocket by someone else. The wick was lit by others who are fearful or threatened by your mere presence in their sphere of comfort. You don't know how much time, you won't know when, where, or if. You just have to keep on living, knowing that at any moment, detonation is possible, and hope that you survive the blast. Much like the cockroach that is disarticulated and smeared into the substrate during a conversation, no one cares what happens to Black people. You've been taught to feel this way, that we have not the right nor the reason to just be. You've been conditioned to have no response to our extermination. But they've been doing this for years. Why didn't I see it sooner? And why did I not realize until now the real danger of the idea that a simple phrase could excuse the taking of a life, not just any life, but any Black or brown life? Not once did any supervisor reach out after this person made that statement. Words have power, and images have power. Sometimes it's not what you say, but what you don't say. Not what you show, but what you don't show. The nightly news leads with, "A Black man was killed by police today." The word Black has taught you not to care. It has become the exact opposite of white, right, truth, beauty, and virtue. As soon as you see or hear it, it primes you to make an excuse for what comes after. He must have done something, we say, and we silently rationalize, even if he didn't. Well, he's still Black, isn't he? Conscious words spoken by the oppressed that move masses are perhaps the quickest way to be placed on somebody's list for targeted assassination, like King, Malcolm, or Fred Hampton. There was no Malcolm or Fred for me, but there was a King. In 1988, on a cold Detroit winter day, he was walking to the bus stop, holding his 2-year-old baby boy. He was on his way to testify in federal court after his arrest a year earlier. Having already been threatened and assaulted by former associates for cooperating, he was still on his way. At the time, I was a wide-eyed 12-year-old attending Ludington Middle School, playing soccer in the snow with my classmates. That afternoon, King walked by. I don't know why I stopped to watch him cross the street, but I did. Just as he got to the other side, a car pulled up occupied by 2 men. As the men approached King, there was something heavy and unfamiliar in the air. My naive classmates and I had no idea that those 2 men would make witnesses of us all that day. And by the end of the few minutes that it took for them to interact with each other, King would be left dead in the snow as his wounded son crawled away. 21 years later, my partner and I responded to a request for assistance from the FBI. When we arrived, we were told we would be participating in an operation to apprehend a Muslim imam. As the members of the FBI tactical team briefed the group, that heavy feeling came to visit once more. During the meeting, we were told that the imam had threatened the lives of law enforcement members in the past and that he had access to firearms. I knew that the imam was going to die that day, but I felt powerless to stop it. We were given our assignments and the group dispersed. My partner and I went to an address in Detroit. It was a red brick dwelling, and the imam hadn't been there. The tactical team went to a location in Dearborn. We stood by to hear the results from the other team, and then it happened. We learned from our colleagues that the imam was dead after shooting at a police canine. It doesn't matter if you are speaking to the masses, out for a jog, or eating ice cream in your living room. ultimately shot and killed because of racist claims they made a mistake. No one cares. Black skin is only prized by others as a possession or a trophy to be taken, and the season in which we can be hunted begins at birth. The reason these deaths are excused, ignored, and discounted is because they belong to Black people. Those of you who behave in a manner that allows these lynchings to continue have found comfort in complicity. Assassination of one's character is the intentional placing of a larger target on the beings of Black folks. In a sense, Black people have always been afforded a watered-down version of constitutional protections. For hundreds of years, those who have wielded a pen, a brush, or a camera have been willing or unwitting accomplices to genocide and the creation of phobia in the minds of others by repeating a singular narrative that was created by the ignorant to instill fear. As a member of law enforcement, I too unwittingly repeated that same narrative before I understood my purpose. I have been both a participant in and a witness to an unacknowledged war on poor people in our so-called civil society since I was 7 years old. Every 365 days, we use metrics and data to measure, to disguise our failures as successes, and are able to convince some that a minimal shift in the number of murders per calendar year are progress. As I rose through the ranks, I found myself arriving at the same places to gift wrap vacant shells in body bags, console, investigate, and arrest generation after generation of the same families, from the same fields, from the same blocks, from the same houses, from the same rooms. I was almost 21 years in before I realized that what we had been doing wasn't working. As police officers, we were confronting a symptom by continually arresting those who made bad choices. A closed homicide case usually means that a citizen is dead and another's life has been taken, and both families are now missing parts, unable to be whole again. Why do we seek justice instead of seeking to stop the reasons these crimes are committed in the first place? Wouldn't that be progress? I began to see the immense power that I possessed in laying out people's mistakes on paper through words and imagery for a court to witness. In some instances, an individual's actions, coupled with those words and images, have been enough to remove someone's being from society forever. Which brings me to my reason for being here, addressing you in this forum today. As a child, I had a friend who was physically and mentally abused to the point that he never learned to effectively communicate. From him, I learned two things. The first was patience, and the second was if you are always misunderstood or ignored, your point of view will never be considered and life will be difficult. My colleague and I, along with many others across this nation, have taught children to be better writers, better photographers, and better storytellers, so that the narratives of who they are begin to change. During the pandemic, I had a chance to really slow down, and I understood that one of the reasons that the narrative was slow to change was because even though there are more photographers and writers with differing experiences because of the color of their skin or where they grew up, their stories were not being seen in major publications. Recently, National Geographic wanted to do a story on the issue of race, but realized that before they did, they should perhaps have a look inward to determine how their coverage had already affected the conversation on how race defines, separates, and unites us. They asked the leading historian to have a look at their archive dating back to the late 1880s, and that historian determined that their coverage was indeed racist, creating singular, biased narratives for entire groups of people where none had existed before. I am here to issue a challenge to all of the decision makers in this room who are responsible for editing, curating, and determining the stories that the nation gets to see. In recent years, many initiatives and positions for diversity and inclusion have become a part of our lexicon and our institutions. Some were created to give the appearance of doing the right thing, while others are actually doing the work. Your newsrooms and your editorial staff should look like a rainbow. The excuses of old, like, we are just not finding enough qualified applicants, will no longer fly. If these spaces are homogenous and you find yourself often not being able to understand a story, or you are triggered by an image and you don't like the feelings that particular material reveals in you, You would have had no trouble understanding why the material being presented was relevant and necessary if the room was populated by individuals of differing race, class, gender identity, religion, age, and so on. To put a finer point on it, don't just pick the person who looks different than you, that will always agree with you, who is grateful just to be included in the conversation. Pick individuals who will challenge your beliefs intelligently so that we can all grow and learn together as coworkers, as students, as members of the audience, and as a better society. Then perhaps America would cease being the bully of the world and the example that no forward-thinking nation wants to follow. Lastly, you have been telling my story for so long that I now have to ask your permission to tell it myself. There are people in this forum today that have the power to change that reality. Allow people to tell their stories. Don't be afraid of what they might say. Perhaps what is said allows some degree of self-reflection so that we can all be kinder to each other. When that day comes, this flag behind me will no longer fly upside down. Thank you.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you, Khary, for that
Thank you, Khary,
poem.
for that poem.
We've got a few questions from the audience, but before we get there, let me ask you, when did you start creating the written word that you just spoke? Was it a while ago? Is it something that happened recently?
It started about 4 years ago. It started when my son was called a nigger on the school bus. We had moved to a suburban community after having to leave Detroit because it was unsafe for my children to even come outside. It was unsafe for my wife to go to the grocery store. So we followed education, and we knew that we may encounter racism, but at the time it was my belief that we can handle the racism and it was less dangerous than the violence that we had seen every day in the city that I was a part of, in the city that I grew up in, and in the city that I worked in. But I think that a portion of that decision was wrong, because initially when we made that decision, the climate was not what it is today. And what I mean by that is that racism up north in Michigan had largely been hidden. And we thought that we were a lot further along than we had been as a society. Obama was elected. He had 2 terms. Everything was great. Everybody was celebrating. Racism had just gone dormant. It was hiding. It was waiting for its proper time to reemerge. And when Donald Trump was elected, in my mind, it was a blessing, because I had no longer been fooled into believing that people thought that I belonged, that people thought that my children were beautiful. People were telling me that my children now weren't. Now I know how much work I have to do before I'm no longer able to do the work. And so that is what inspired me to write.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate you sharing that, Khary. We're going to take a few questions from the audience. So the first question comes from Ken Hawkins. He asks, what was the reaction from your colleagues in the LE community when your work became public? On the whole, did they learn from or reject the message you presented in your work?
So a lot of things happen to other people that have never happened to me since I've been an adult. A lot of people are disrespected. A lot of people are assaulted. Largely, those things don't happen to me. And it may have to do with the way that I look and the way that I carry myself, which coincidentally, while it can help me avoid some confrontations, it doesn't stop a white police officer who doesn't know me, who stopped me for speeding, from being extremely fearful of me because I'm 6'2" and almost 300 pounds. Many of my colleagues that disagree don't speak to me. They don't want to engage in that discussion. I have had a couple of colleagues that didn't necessarily understand, approach, and have dialogue, which I have no problem with. Um, I've had many conversations with members of law enforcement that were people of color who are intellectuals to begin to breathe life into these issues. There are topics of defund the police. There are some who say this isn't this isn't a training issue, and I would argue that it is. I've been to a training that, through imagery and words, taught people who may not have had a bias against Black people but didn't know Black people to fear Black people. And so I would definitely say that a large portion of this is a training issue, but another portion of this has to do with the reason in which law enforcement in this country was created in the first place. It was created to keep Native Americans in check. It was created to further enslave and capture freed Black folk in this country that you can no longer have work for free. It is not strayed far from its roots. These conversations are extremely difficult and extremely triggering. When I go to law enforcement trainings around the country, largely the people who inform the direction of what law enforcement will be are older white men. Very seldom are they women, and even less so are they people of color. And people of color who have a differing experience inside of law enforcement because they grew up a certain way, because they learn different things, are rarely ever able to participate in these conversations, much like people of color who are trained photographers and writers are not allowed to maintain the integrity of a story. It's killed or it's changed in such a way that the writer, the photographer, or the person being interviewed doesn't recognize it. And it's done, that is done so that it makes somebody else feel comfortable. My story isn't supposed to make you feel comfortable. If you feel triggered or you feel fearful because of my presence or because of something that I've written, maybe you should engage in a conversation. But before engaging in a conversation with me, you should check yourself.
Nicely put. I have another question coming for you from Beth Nakamura. She said your work is stunning, and she's wondering how it's been for you privately to reconcile in public sentiment toward law enforcement with your own current work and history in law enforcement.
Read that for me one more time. I'm sorry.
Okay. It says, she's wondering how it's been for you to privately reconcile public sentimental. It says public and then remix sentimental toward law enforcement with your own current work and history in law enforcement. Sorry if I don't understand the question or.
So I think I understand the question perfectly.
Okay.
So it hasn't been that difficult for me. These last 4 or so years, I've been triggered every day. And it didn't have to do with what was going on in law enforcement. It started with what was going on in society. And the reason that it is as difficult as any other day is because I came to realize that when I leave this privilege behind in these credentials, in this piece of tin, this somehow affords me more citizenship than anybody else that look like me. When I leave this behind, whatever endangers the lives of Black people also endangers me. And so if I don't do anything to change that, I have nobody to complain to. I have nobody to blame but myself. And so I'm not more fearful as a member of law enforcement because of the things that are going on with regard to attitudes towards law enforcement. I never wear a uniform. People don't see me as the police. They see me as a big, scary Black dude. That's what they see me as. And so I'm not affected by that sentiment. If you wanted less dead police officers, if you wanted less dead children, if you wanted less dead veterans that return home who are robbed on the street, educate people better, right? Why are you making education so unattainable that it is almost assured that you make a mistake that I can capitalize upon and put you in prison for the rest of your life? Educate people better. stop withholding education like it's only a privilege afforded to a select few. That's not right. And that's why we're where we are.
All right, I have a question from Christian K. Lee. Christian says, while working in law enforcement, did you feel your voice was muffled? Are there things you wish you could say at work that wouldn't be well received? And how does your photography play into this? I don't know if we mentioned that you are retired. That's correct.
So I did retire from the Detroit Police Department. And before I spoke, I was supposed to give this disclaimer because I work for the Michigan Attorney General's office as a special agent with the Conviction Integrity Unit. My opinions are my own, and they do not reflect the opinion of the Attorney General. And so if anybody's going through this, they'll find it. But with that being said, in the beginning of my career, I entered an environment that allowed me to understand that even if I felt differently about something, I had very little standing or very few people that agreed with me, so I wouldn't say anything. Towards the end of my career, I began to find my voice because I saw that people were looking up to me. My wife was telling me, you have so much to say, and people would listen to you. You need to say something. During the Women's March, after our 45th occupant was sworn in, there was a woman in a crowd of beautiful women who held a sign in protest. And that sign said, we need a Black cop to save us. I think she was talking to every Black police officer in this country that has been afforded privilege, but has been afforded an education in society that very few people get to see. I've seen the levers that get to be pulled from the time you're born to the first time you get to make a bad decision. And those decisions, when they compound upon each other, end up landing you in prison. And the next generation that you birth makes those same mistakes, and they're incarcerated as well. Why don't we do something different? We don't do anything different because many of us who have a divergent perspective do not participate in the conversation. And rather than ask to participate in the conversation, I chose to elbow my way in, and I refuse to be ignored.
Awesome. We've got a lot of thank yous from the audience out here, just being very happy with the words you are saying and the challenge that you put out. And we have about 2 minutes left. How do you feel going forward with your work? What do you think what's next for you? Are you going to stay in Detroit? Are you staying there to continue to build your community? Do you want to reach out to different other cities in the United States? What are your thoughts?
So my colleague Roman and I are going to continue to build photographic partnerships across the country and across the city and around the world. Personally, I would like to finish following the thread of what happened to my brother. And I want to know who killed him, even though he committed suicide. There are many things that happen in his life, from failures on my part, to failures in my family, to failures of society, to failures of institutions that led to his death. And I want to explore that so that I can tell the story so that these things do not happen to other people. I know that for 43 years, and I'm 43 years old, for more than 43 years, there's been a place specially assigned for me that I've never occupied in a 6x9 cell. If I ended up occupying that cell and I'd been in the position to change the way people live when they're incarcerated, and I did nothing but wanted to complain when I got there, shame on me. That's what's next.
Awesome. Well, Khary, I really do appreciate you coming on and speaking with our audience and speaking to me today. I really hope and for a positive future ahead of you. And I'm kind of hurrying because we're being kicked out, but I just want to thank you again for speaking. Thank you so much for sharing your work, sharing your perspective. Thank you everyone for joining us today for Khary's presentation. We are so grateful. We will see you soon for another presentation by Michael Santiago. So stay tuned, guys.